Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I am Diane Fleeser, an April board member and the moderator of today's session. Thank you for joining us for reaching and engaging farm worker population. I want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started today. First, when you scroll over the screen, a menu bar pops up. Depending on what device you are on, you can find that menu bar at the top or at the bottom of your screen. There is where you will find the closed captioning for today's session. You can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. For sign language interpreting, you can find the interpreter on the screen with the name Sandy. If you are only able to see the speaker, make sure you are in gallery view so you can see the interpreter and the presentation at the same time. You can find the option to change the view at the top of your screen under a tab for view. If you have technical issues today, please use the chat feature. You can find the word bubble in that same menu bar. Once that is selected, that will allow you to follow along with the chat or add in your own comments. If you would like to turn the chat feature off, if you are using a screen reader, you can do that by pressing Alt-H. To ask questions or make a comment, you can also select the hand option on the menu bar, and that allows us to know you have a question. For those of you on the phone today or using keystrokes, we ask that you press *9 or Alt-Y on your keypad to raise your hand. We will then let you know when you can unmute. You can select the unmute option or Alt-A if using keystrokes. Remember, if you join into the conversation, please keep all background noise down as much as possible so that we can hear you clearly. As a last reminder, April and our conference is a safe and inclusive space for marginalized communities. We ask that everyone present in today's session treat each other with respect and that you enter this and every session with good intentions. This includes respecting names, pronouns, and other personal identifiers and avoiding the use of harmful or derogatory language. Thanks so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Kimber.
I started to say good morning, everyone, and I realize I'm on Eastern time. I'm logging in from Indiana. My name is Kimber Nicoletti Martinez, and I am the Latinx or Latino Farm Worker Outreach Coordinator for the National Agribility Project. And I'm also the director of the MESA Community Empowerment and Violence Prevention Program. And I've been working in and with farm workers my entire life. So it's great to be here with you all today. And I threw out a question for you this morning at the opening to type in the chat for us where you're logging in from today and what your favorite Halloween candy is. And I see that Abby from April, she's logging in from Massachusetts, and her favorite Halloween candy is Reese's. Now there's Reese Cups, Reese's Pieces. There's so many variations of Reese's, so I'll think about that. But I'd like to see what your favorite Halloween candy is. So today I'm going to talk to you about my work and lessons learned in serving farm workers and farm workers with disabilities. The stories and examples that I'm going to use or to share with you really come from my own journey in farm worker outreach work, but are also seen through the lens of my own lived experiences and values. So your stories and experiences are also seen through your lens and lived experiences. Everyone brings a rich tapestry of their own experiences, and I look forward to learning from all of you. Just looking here, we have some people, Amy, favorite Halloween candy is candy corn, Lawrence, Kansas. Kate from North Dakota, Butterfinger. We got Tyler here from Wisconsin, but logging in from Northern Illinois. Favorite Halloween candy is I'm not picky. There's sugar in it. I'm happy. Great to hear. And Michelle here logging in from Colombia. Favorite Halloween candy is Kit Kats. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Frank from Utah. Thank you, everyone, for logging in the chat with us there, and we'll continue seeing what other people are saying. If you could move it to the next slide now, please. Now, as I told you that in this role, I'm doing the outreach coordinator with farm workers with the AgriBility program. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with AgriBility. How many are familiar with AgriBility? Raise your hand. Let's see if we have any hands raised there. Okay, it might be a new thing to a lot of people. Well, the AgriBility program, it was included in the 1990 Farm Bill, and it was funded in 1991. As I understand, there were other pre-AgriBility models that existed, but this one started covering like 25 states. So the vision of AgriBility is to enhance the quality of life for farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural workers with disabilities so that they and their families and their communities continue to succeed in rural America. So this might be including gainful employment, occupational support, assistive technology, support needed for daily living activities, also maybe support for family and caregivers. And in AgriBility, when we talk about disability, we're talking about the whole range of disability from chronic diseases to physical disabilities, mental health, as well as chronic diseases. So we work with a lot of communities, and I was hired over a year and a month ago, I think it is, because they really wanted to start increasing the support for farm workers in agricultural communities. So could you move to the next slide, please? So when we think of farm workers, there's a lot of different kind of people who might be considered farm workers. Sometimes it might be workers, local people in the community who do seasonal farm work. Others can be people who travel from other places to do farm work. So in that category that would be considered farm workers, you might have immigrant workers, people here with an H-2A visa, some people that are citizens, some people that are undocumented, Latinos. There's also farm workers that come from other communities depending on where you are located. So as we think about this, I know the idea in this setting is for us to think about how you can adapt your programs to conduct outreach and engage with farm worker populations in the places where you live. So could you go to the next slide, please? So what do you know about farm workers? So I'd like to invite you again to utilize the chat feature. I just want to say that Gabe says he loves 1,000 Grand, great candy bars. Sasha says Reese Pieces cups. Okay, we're still going on with the Halloween candy. It all sounds delicious. So tell me what you know about farm workers. Are any of you currently conducting outreach either with Latinos, farm workers, Spanish-speaking communities? And tell us what kind of things that you're doing. We see Meg's here saying that they're very dedicated and hard workers. And let's see if anybody else is going to respond here. So, you know, I'm sorry.
Kimber, this is Abby. There are 2 hands up.
Okay.
We have Independent Living Council of Wisconsin.
All right, are they going to unmute or are they going to type in their question? How do we handle that?
This is Tyler. I'm sorry, my hand was up from earlier. My
Oh,
apologies.
sorry. Hi, Tyler. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. Sorry about that.
Hi, Tyler. Thank you.
Hi.
Was there another question, Abby?
There was another hand up from Mary, but hers might have been up from earlier as well.
People
Okay.
wanting to talk about the candy, right? So as we talk about, the farm workers, sometimes people come with some sort of like an H-2A visa, maybe the visa later on expires. So, and really when we talk about documented workers, we talk about those who hold visas, living in the United States, and this might include legal permanent residents, what you might hear people talk about, a green card. So these documented populations, although they are lawfully present, they're often uninformed or misinformed about access to services and legal rights. So, as we think about a farm worker with disabilities, their decisions related to safety, help seeking, and reporting really is impacted by their immigration status, as well as a lot of other various cultural dynamics and norms. And this will influence how you would engage that community, or how that community farm workers could begin to see your independent living center as a safe space for them. And it's also important for farm workers with disabilities to learn about the legal, healthcare benefits, social services available in the United States. And this might help them overcome some of the family or cultural barriers that otherwise deter them from seeking help. One thing to note is that as you're doing outreach with farm workers, if you come across or start working with an immigrant farm worker with a disability, you should always first refer them to an immigration attorney and never refer them directly to any sort of government immigration bureaus. The consequences of not having the most current legal information could be harsh and could result in them being swiftly deported, which is now called removed from the US. And if a farm worker is removed in this way, it may permanently affect their ability to enter later or prevent them from gaining legal immigration status in the United States. I want to stop here and look at a couple of notes that we have. Deb says we started working with this population, but COVID happened and we are looking at re-engaging. Brenda mentions here, I grew up in a community where seasonal farm workers came to work during harvest. Our public schools provided programs for the children, for the families who were working in the fields. So that's a couple of comments about the experiences of our participants today. Could we move to the next slide, please? So as we start thinking about, I'm assuming that you're in this session because you're considering how maybe your program could engage or conduct outreach with farm workers. So as you start thinking about that, how do you think that you might start engaging farm worker communities? It might be helpful to understand some of the obstacles faced by farm workers. So, first of all, when we think about obstacles, there is a documented history of discrimination against people with disabilities. We know this. And at times, the disability may not be apparent or visible, such as some mental health disabilities or chronic health issues. For immigrant farm workers with disabilities, there may be an increased experience of discrimination for being identified as an immigrant. If they are seen as an immigrant with a disability, it may be a barrier to employment, housing, support in the community. There may be services for which they are not eligible, or at least they're perceived to not be eligible. So let me share an example. We had a visiting speaker who was a Latina. She really wasn't a farm worker, but with disabilities, who wanted to conduct some site visits at some local agencies to better understand the landscape prior to her training here on the Purdue campus. She and I were chatting away in Spanish, throughout her visit when we stopped to visit one of the local agencies. When we arrived at the front door, one of the workers told us that they did not serve our kind here. This person had assumed our eligibility based on the fact that we were speaking Spanish. Not that it was comforting, but you can imagine the surprise for this individual when I asked what kind that was that he was referring to. I joked with my guests that I'm a vegetarian and that many places don't provide vegetarian options. So I was sure that was what he meant. Now, another challenge that for farm workers with disabilities is the cultural concept of work. Immigrants with disabilities are typically expected to work long hours and not complain. So due to this fear, many farm workers will try to hide disabilities, deportation, concerns that they'll be deported because they're considered a burden. This fear makes them more vulnerable to victimization at home and in the workplace. Now, farm workers with disabilities are often vulnerable to exploitation by employers, caregivers, and family members. According to the Pew Research Center, the United States is home to more immigrants than any other country in the world, with over 40 million people who were born in another country. With an ever-increasing number of immigrants in the U.S. and a high likelihood that many of them have disabilities, since 1 in 4 people have a disability, there's a need to be able to provide culturally appropriate and accessible services for farm workers or immigrant farm workers with disabilities. Now, another obstacle that we experience is cultural and language barriers. A lot of services, they might say they don't have Spanish-speaking staff. And even if they do have some services in Spanish or have somebody in their agency that's Spanish-speaking, a lot of times they haven't organized their services or their program that it looks like the kind of help or the help seeking that farm workers would utilize. Now, another obstacle has to do with the fear of the system. So when I talk about the system, I'm referring to various institutions. Farm workers may feel uncomfortable or fearful of various types of institutions. So distrust of the system or law enforcement is expressed across both immigrant farm worker communities and communities with disabilities. So really the absence of support networks for farm workers with disability, especially those that are newly arriving to the US, significantly affects their abilities to access timely medical, law enforcement, legal, and mental health assistance. So by engaging with farm worker advocates, attorneys, and immigrant-based organizations, disability advocates really can start building a collaborative relationship with programs that the farm worker community trust. It's important the disability service organizations and immigrant community-based organizations to develop those collaborative partnerships to better serve the community. So experts in serving farm workers can train and help improve advocates' understanding of their legal rights, options for farm workers with disabilities, and the cultural and linguistic and immigration related dynamics for farm workers. Now, disability rights advocates can train an educated community-based organization on creating accessible and empowering services for farm workers with disabilities and help identify culturally affirming support services. Now, equally important are advocates who work in and with law enforcement and prosecution agencies that have a deep understanding and expertise of helping people that have been harmed by the system to be able to access justice. So it's really important to develop that connection as we look at those kind of obstacles faced. I want to make a comment here that Susie said Elsa Quesada, the director of the Illinois Center in the Valley East of Santa Cruz, emphasized work with Spanish-speaking farm workers. She described a number of consumers who were disabled from exposures to pest control chemicals and bad water. I've seen aerial pesticides sprayed right next to farm worker housing, lots of neurological illness and asthma. Thank you so much, Susie, for sharing that. And yes, that is true. Could we go to the next slide, please? Now, farm workers often work in remote places and can be invisible. So I've had a lot of people not realize that there were even farm workers in their community. So as your organization thinks about developing a relationship with farm workers, it's really a great place to start. Is the best way for your organization to engage the community. It helps a little to understand how the community is organized and what help seeking looks like. So really many farm worker communities, I say many because it's never all of them, continue to follow sort of a traditional family paradigm. So that means when you work with the family, you work with the whole family. So that would include, you know, both parents and children. Many communities tend to continue to value personal relationships. So as you start engaging that community, the idea of personalismo is develop that connection instead of getting right to your, whatever your work agenda is. So it's really about that, developing the human relationship. And in a lot of farm worker communities, they still prioritize family relationships and also the needs and the values of the community over outside communities. So I think a great place for you to start, it really is to develop that rapport and understand that nature of informal help seeking. When I talk about this with people, it's the idea that informal help seeking is that oftentimes in farm worker communities, people aren't looking for a service provider that you go to who's a stranger to say, I need help with this. Rather, they're looking for someone who's trusted in the family. It could be a community leader, it could be an informal community leader, a family member that you go speak to informally. I have this story. Many years ago, we had this Mexican store that we always went to in my family. And I'd like to call it the I Got a Guy, because we would go there and we could ask this guy for anything. I'd say like, oh, we need help getting a driver's license. We need help finding a bouncy house. Do you know who provides this kind of service? And because this guy was sort of the center of the community, he'd always tell me, well, I got a guy, I got this guy, call that guy. And so it was this idea opposed to us going into, say, an agency with a desk and some crumpled magazines. That's pre-COVID, I understand, but was to go to someone that we trusted. So your idea in developing this outreach is for you to be that person, you to be that hub in the farm worker community that they feel like they can trust you and they can come to you. So can we move to the next slide? There we go. So, you know, it's important as we talk about you becoming that person, and you might say, well, we don't have that kind of expertise here. So then you can really start looking at identifying agencies that are invested in supporting and advocating for immigrants with disabilities, or people that do farm worker service providers or other kind of immigrant serving agencies. You know, what we know is preliminary results tell us that indicate that food provides a physical link that connects individuals to their heritage, culture, and local communities. So, you know, despite variability and the importance that immigrants attribute to food, it still remains one of the most resilient tools for informants identified as central to identity formation and maintenance. So therefore, when you start thinking about developing outreach, food can be a very useful tool for you to understand the community. What kind of foods are they preferring? It'll help you understand where they are in terms of their own level of acculturation or assimilation, and let you know what would be the best way for you to start going about maybe setting up some outreach, some introduction events where you provide some food, you invite some families in, you do some kind of activities. So now why don't you tell me, what are you doing any of these kind of outreach activities right now in your organizations? Please type that in the chat box for me. And we will see if anybody is doing those kind of things, or see what people are saying here. Okay, we're not getting any responses yet. So we'll move on to the next slide. Now here we have a picture of a little girl. This is a farm worker girl. One of the things that we do in our farm worker outreach is that we collect lots of donations that we distribute to the families, toys, clothing, food, and we invite people in. And so here's a picture of this little girl, and she picked out several toys. But then after a while, as we started showing up in the community, that they'd see us and they were eager to see us, and they were eager, we became that person that they felt safe with. And so I want to ask you these questions to think about yourself, and please share with us your thoughts in the chat box to think about how are you building your capacity for culturally responsive services or outreach, and type a few words for us in there. So, you know, for us, it began by understanding that, looking at what the community needs were. So, you know, regardless of what your program is, you have to center on the needs of the farm worker community. So a lot of times they're very poor people, very humble people. And so, but there's also a lot of need. And for us in Indiana, there's also very limited resources. So for us, it became a two-way thing. One thing, we started engaging mainstream organizations with helping them develop a heart, if you will, for farm workers. And so in that process, they start donating. And of course, I've been doing this now for many years. So now it's just a thing. People call me and say, hey, I have this. Do you know anybody that needs it? So for us, it was also internally how I had to work internally with our business office to help them understand that the needs of farm workers were very different than other kinds of programs that they'd seen. And so we had to learn to sort of adapt the language. In a way, it was like interpreting. And that was interpreting to business language, interpreting from the needs of the farm worker community. And as we talked about just briefly, the idea of how does that community define support and help is something that, as you start thinking about this, are some things that you need to consider, because in working with farm workers all over the United States, I can tell you, like, the way farm worker communities are organized in southern Arizona is a lot of people travel back and forth across the border from Mexico to Yuma. And so when people do outreach in that community, they set up little booths alongside of the road, and they go out there like between 2 and 4 a.m. as the workers line up to cross the border. Can you imagine? I've never had to do outreach at 3 in the morning, but it's very different there. Also, farm workers in California, a lot of them are not migrating, but rather that they work year round. Here in Indiana, our farm workers come for a period of time, and if they're seasonal, they might go do other kinds of work. If they're migrant, then they travel to other states. And another good question as you think about doing this outreach is, are you able to identify other types of support services that you can offer if you have funding limitations? I was talking with one of the programs, trying to remember, it was out west somewhere, maybe in Utah or Idaho, but they were really doing some fabulous outreach work where they were having movie nights and providing other kinds of support to develop relationships in farm worker and Latinx communities. And then if you don't have that kind of expertise in your organization, can you develop community partnerships, right? With other farm worker or Latino Spanish language service providers in your community that could help you with that. So let's move on to the next slide. And I want to touch base with everyone because you're all getting very quiet on me. Just pop in the chat box and tell me what thing stands out to you right now. What have you learned thus far, or what did you come to this session to learn? And as we're waiting for your response, something that's really can be helpful if this is a whole new effort for your organization is thinking about training people in your organization and your service providers, not only on what we call sort of a culturally affirming approach to work, but also maybe some specifics about working with Latino immigrant, if that's the kind of farm workers that you have, or just about farm worker populations in general. Because, you know, for us in an hour's time, this is just very a brief overview of things. All right, Beck says the need to be a person who deserves to be trusted, not going to communities and demanding participation. And Tatkin says, how can we have Mennonites within our community, which is why we came. Okay, that's what we're seeing right now. Yeah, that is very true. I often tell people when you first start doing outreach in community is that you go and you participate. You don't come with your agenda. You come to see what it is that they need. Oftentimes, regardless of the kind of community it is I'll go into a community and I'll start participating in their things because I want to show them that I'm vested in their community, not just I'm there to maybe meet some expectation or objective on my grant. And so then after I've developed a relationship with them, then I start suggesting, what about if this, or have you thought about people with disabilities in your community? And I would recommend the same thing. And I don't have experience in working with the Mennonite community, although we do have people at AgriAbility that do have that experience and expertise that could help you with that, Tatkins. Deb saying, I think the idea of developing a human relationship first. Brenda saying, looking for ways to develop relationships so that we can serve the Latino community. Jamie saying, I love the I Got a Guy approach. In Idaho, the Silk has worked with community partners. Okay, so Jamie, you're at the place that does the movie night and vaccine clinics, but are struggling to continue to build that trust and relationship. Michelle, definitely, I agree, learning more outreach strategies. Independent living, meeting people where they are is far more important than just offering them things unsolicited. So you all have a lot of great expertise that you're bringing to that conversation there. And I was really impressed with the movie night that the Idaho community was doing, Jamie. Just that effort of creating something that families could come to. Because to me, that showed that you weren't asking for something in return. You were trying to develop that relationship. You were focusing like movie night. People could bring the family. Now, so how would you take that a little bit deeper? How would you go beyond developing that? A lot of times we've done things where we'll do some outreach things, and then maybe we'll ask people to participate in what we call, I don't want to say committee in English, comite, because it's a little more informal than that. I'll just ask some people, hey, we really need some insight in how we could do this. What kind of things do you think the people need? Or, conduct a listening session with the community, and you have to provide lots of things, lots of food, lots of, like I said, we hold these drives where we have people donate clothes and things, and it's a great way to get people to come and to participate. I also use a lot of prizes. And whenever I do educational things, if you were a group of farm workers right now, I would have some kind of prize or raffle at the end, because it's just sort of the cultural norm. I did an outreach event recently at a migrant Head Start center, and we went and we worked with this community group called Retrained, and they're a bunch of toy train enthusiasts, and they often give us trains to give away to farm worker families. So we had one of those trains, and we gave it away as a raffle. So then people feel like you're getting our way of doing things. So in doing training with organizations and service providers, that's one thing you could do. I definitely would encourage you, if you want some more follow-up information around this, definitely reach out to me after this training. Could we go to the next slide? Thank you so much. So as we've been talking about the outreach and education, you want to make sure that you're centering your outreach around the family, the community. More importantly, you want to start identifying who the community leaders are. Now, community leaders may not always be somebody who's the president, or in farm worker communities, it's sometimes a crew leader, it's sometimes not the crew leader. And you'll find, just by having some conversations, or what I like to call, you got to drink a lot of coffee, just wandering around, meeting with people, chatting with them, and start identifying who those community leaders are. And then start working on creating those community specific educational opportunities. When I say education, it could be, we often frame our things around something that's relevant to the community, because we're centering around the family and the community. So let's say I want to talk about how to have a healthier family. Well, if the family has needs, or somebody with disabilities with unmet needs, that does impact the family's health. So when we talk about how to have a healthy family, we invite people in. We talk about other things around family health. What does it look like? What are the symptoms if there's problems with the family health? I usually start off with something like, well, there can be sneezing, right? This was pre-COVID when I developed this. So now I'm like, there could be a fever, there could be, and then you keep digging deeper what some health issues or some needs in the family are. But you keep it brief. I do a lot of theater arts or arts-based work when I'm doing educational opportunities like this with families, when I do outreach, because it's a great opportunity to sort of alleviate stress as people are talking about things that they're not used to talking about, as well as it gives them an opportunity to create something where they can have a dialogue. I'll often ask people to draw a picture. Could you move to the next slide, please? Or in this case, what looks like somebody giving like a really compelling speech is actually somebody doing a theater arts thing. So it's a group of farm workers, and this one was specific to farm worker men and getting fathers engaged in the family. But we utilize this opportunity to engage the community in something that they understand, while at the same time building their trust with us, and also building their capacity to understand what kind of support our program can offer. So if we could move to the next slide here. Now, actions that we can take. So some of the actions, just getting started, are to do something to engage the community. Now, years ago, I'm getting so old now, I don't want to say how many years it was. So a couple years ago, we had a local library and they wanted to start doing outreach with Latino immigrant and farm worker communities. And they came to me and they said, Kimber, we had flyers in Spanish. We had some Spanish language material. We served some chips and we served some chichi salsa. I don't know if anybody, you want to type in the chat box what you can see wrong with that approach. It kind of made me laugh, but it was also meeting the library where they were. They wanted to try something. So they wanted to try an action to engage the community. They just didn't go deeper to think about really what would be culturally affirming. It wasn't the chips. The salsa probably was not a hit, but it went deeper than just people putting flyers in Spanish, because what you have to think about is what's on the other side when you put those flyers in Spanish and people come in your agency or they come in your center and tell you, you know, that they have a need. Are you prepared on that end? I'm going to tell on Purdue for a minute. A couple days ago, no, not really. Everything's a long time ago. I don't know why that is, but Purdue decided that they were going to take out a full page ad in a sort of a national Spanish language newspaper. You know, it's one of those that you get in the farm, in the market, right? You pick up this newspaper in Spanish and they said, you know, somos Purdue, we are Purdue, right? And we speak Spanish. Well, at the time, there was only a couple people here that speak Spanish, me, and I don't know, somebody else. They published this, it came out, the calls started coming in, and people started saying they would send them to me. Well, there was a guy calling from Puerto Rico because there was some local program with extension. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but a community-based program in Puerto Rico. And he was wanting the details on it, where it was, how much it cost to go. And so when they decided to start this outreach, they didn't think through what was on the back end of it, really think that process through. So what's going to happen? Kind of the field of dreams thing. What's going to happen? If you build it, they will come. So that's what we get to. The next thing is really learning more about the community needs. What is it that they need? What, you know, and a lot of that can happen just by listening to them, by observing. You know, certainly a lot of times there's needs like they're doing in Idaho for vaccine clinics, but it will really help if you circle back and you think about that process of developing those relationships with other culturally specific organizations or Latino or farm worker advocacy providers in the community. I'm a member of the Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, and that's the National Farm Worker Women Alliance. And we have connections all over the states with different organizations that are advocates for farm workers. So, you know, really learning who those organizations are and maybe to help you better understand the needs. Try something small. And then finally, you know, looking at adapting your approach. So what's your mainstream approach? Do you do outreach with other communities? And how can you translate that so that you are framing that around the culturally specific needs of farm workers or Latino immigrants in your community? And then can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is a retreat I did, I don't know when it was, 2006. And it was based on, I'll tell you what it was called, Cruzando la Frontera, or something like that, crossing the border, living between two cultures. I don't know, I always come up with some little name. And these mothers who came here as farm workers, and their kids started growing up here, and there was some real cultural disconnect. So who I partnered with back then was the local Latino outreach services within the Catholic Church in the area. And they were really super excited. They'd host us. We had retreats. We did art things. We developed campaigns. They helped me develop photo novellas, like basically educational comic books. But it really was all with the input and the voice of the community. So it really was about developing that trust in the community. So that was a great time. So then let's go to the next slide, please, as we're getting down to the wire here. So as you start thinking about culturally affirming outreach events, can any of you type in for me now and tell me what kind of outreach events that you're currently doing? And type that in the chat box for me. Yeah, you don't have to start off with like a big gala. You can actually start off with something small, or if you're connected with the farm worker or the Latinx immigrant community in your area, think about setting up a table somewhere, coming up with something just to have basically like a meet and greet with people, to get to know them, to hear what their concerns are. Okay, we're not having people respond today here, but so it might be your first time that you're trying to do some culturally affirming outreach event. So I definitely would encourage you to partner with someone and find some on some small scale that you can do it. And think of, you want to make sure that your center is accessible to all populations. And so this is a great opportunity to get to know people, to understand what their thoughts are, how they feel about it. And really, it varies from culture to culture, but I can definitely tell you that when we talk about disabilities, there is some resistance to that in communities. It's not something that people talk about a lot. What I say as a child, my mother's favorite saying was "Aguántate," and it was just kind of like suck it up, deal with it. That idea connecting back to what we were talking about in the beginning about work ethic. And so a lot of times people don't talk about problems in the family, or may not even recognize that someone has a disability. I've worked with a lot of families that they don't recognize maybe their children have cognitive disabilities. It's not something that processes to them. It's not something that they were socialized to think about. But definitely it becomes a challenge for the family, and an area that they really could use your support. It's a great opportunity for you. So if we could go to the next slide, which is our question slide. Let's see if we have any questions. Abby, can you tell me, do we have any questions?
We do. We just had one come in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee that says, I seem to be finding when we use the term, quote, disability, we are not getting very good results. Is there a better term to use or way to describe what we can help with?
Well, that's a really good point, because as I was telling you, it's not really something that it's not really part of the language or a way that people want to define a family member. So really, I guess I don't actually use disability a lot, but we just talk about the kind of support that we can provide, or more on the end of instead of like an identity like that, more about like, oh, there's help, and do you have family members that have problems, because what I find more and more in farm worker communities in this past year is that we've really started talking a lot more about how debilitating mental health is. And so, but you're right, we frequently don't say the word disability. Now, somebody recently told me a word that they were trying to use and found it a little more palatable, but it's slipping my mind right now. But I know when I'm doing work with people, I just really talk about the people in general rather than sort of categorizing them as somebody having a disability. Facing challenges. I like that, Deb. Yeah. Let's see. Do we have another question or just that one?
So far, just that one. But remember, folks, you're welcome to type your questions into the Q&A or contribute any comments you have in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you.
We definitely want to, I realize this is an overview and you might have more specific questions. So let's see. Have there been successful outreach to people who work in CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations? We certainly have done outreach with, do a lot of outreach work with CAFOs and people working in different animal operations. A lot of times you're not conducting the outreach at the job site. You're conducting the outreach in the community. So the idea really is, because a lot of times, especially when you talk about CAFOs and different sort of animal production areas, that there's a lot of rules, a lot of sort of how things are done. People are fearful about losing their jobs. So it's really important that we're conducting outreach with people outside of the work setting. In that case, like for us in AgriAbility, a lot of times we might develop a relationship with the farmer or the person who runs the animal operation to see if, they would allow us to go out and provide some education about the kind of support that we have to offer. And we've had some pretty good luck with that. Let's see, Amy saying for people with disabilities, using phrases other than disability can easily be seen as a sign of disrespect. You would use caution with this line of thinking. Disability rights and our civil rights, and disability advocates have fought long and hard to gain equal rights, and the term disability is fully integrated into that movement in that community. Well, I couldn't agree more, Amy. Thank you for making that great point. It's just that sometimes there's so much resistance in farm worker communities because if we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation, there's concerns. People are fearful about being labeled as a person with a disability because of being ostracized, or concerns about being deported or not being hired for jobs, and not fully understanding what disability rights are. So that's a good point. Thank you for sharing that. Any other comments that people would like to share? Let's see. From Frobins here, I am the CEL coordinator for a nonprofit. I've just started working with AgriAbility Project here in Utah. At present, we have no specific outreach events, but I do have a relationship with a well-respected Latino restaurant owner. I'm planning on meeting with him to get his input as to what kind of event we could do. Also, the term farm worker applies to people that work in other agribusiness, such as landscape businesses. Sure, that is true. And when I say farm worker, you say, no, I'm just kidding. I couldn't think of anything clever there to say. A lot of times when you say farm worker, depending on what program you're talking about, is how that farm worker definition is applied. There's some programs that will say if a person has moved for the purpose of pursuing agricultural work within the past 2 years, then they're considered a migrant farm worker. Some programs will include things like landscaping or trees, nurseries. Other programs don't provide support or don't include nursery workers or landscaping businesses in the farm worker definition. So it makes it really confusing when you're telling people how to look at work with different programs, but and you really kind of have to explore that if you're partnering with someone that has different kinds of funding. We just have a couple minutes left here. Any other questions or comments? If you'd please go to the final slide so people could get my contact information. I welcome any follow-up questions or comments. You can certainly reach out to me, and we'll wait here for a minute, see if we have any other comments that people have. I think that's a great idea about reaching out. That's a great opportunity to reach out to the Latino restaurant owner and get his input. He'll have something to say about what kind of things he thinks people in your area would attend, what their needs are, and maybe the possibility of it, maybe inviting people into the restaurant. Maybe he'll host it for you. Well, all right, if there's no other comments or questions, thank you everyone for being here with us today. I really appreciate your time and your attention and your interest in supporting farm worker communities with disabilities. And please follow up with any questions that you may have, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Kimber. This is Diane. And thank you to everyone who's attended today's session. We've really enjoyed this conversation. And Kimber, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us all. Please don't forget to take the time at the end of this session to complete just a short evaluation to let us know how we can continue to improve our sessions. And we look forward to seeing all of you back for our next session starting at 1:30. Thank you so much.